instrumental in showing that the hydrogen economy can actually work. Two examples out of Aberdeen and Paris, and very happy to see Gordon McIntosh and also Mathieu Gardies. And Gordon was responsible for bringing hydrogen into Aberdeen and creating the largest bus fleet. Can we put everything on mute so that there's no noise in the back?
Oh, okay.
Great.
Okay.
I think that's better, yes. And so Gordon has been instrumental in bringing hydrogen to Aberdeen and creating the biggest bus fleet, European bus fleet in Aberdeen. It's a great success story. And Mathieu is doing the same thing in a different field, in the taxi field. Oh, what's happening now?
Mais qu'on va s'aimer, j'adore.
I think somebody's sharing their screen there.
Il y a des grenades.
Et c'est Francis.
Bon, c'est pas encore commencé, ils sont en train de galérer avec leur...
Non, Francis. J'ai pas la main sur Francis. Francis, est-ce que tu peux couper Francis?
Je crois qu'il n'entend pas.
Oui, mais bon, il faut que je...
Oui, j'ai coupé le son. Hein,
Non, c'est tu as partagé ton écran, non?
Ah bon?
C'est ridicule.
Bon, ben, je sais pas quoi faire, je vais peut-être me couper, ça va?
Ouais, là, très bien.
Ah bon, d'accord, je suis désolé.
Qui sono
Bon.
tutti...
Alors,
Ce l'hai una foto da mettere?
Non, non la voglio mettere.
Christian?
Oui.
Il faudrait couper le micro pour tout le monde.
C'est ce que j'ai fait tout à l'heure.
Et à tous!
Ouais. Attends.
OK.
C'est bon?
Ça doit marcher là. So I'm sorry that little problems of getting used to Zoom, but it's a good tool. So Mathieu has been able, or has had the vision to create a town that is without exhaust and is a clean energy. And he's created a company, a taxi company, which has, well, I think he'll tell you himself, but it's the biggest hydrogen taxi company in the world, I think, Mathieu. So with this, I would like to just pass over to our two guests. We will have questions. I will have questions for both Gordon and Mathieu, and we will start with Gordon because he's done this a bit earlier than Mathieu. And after that, we will do that for about 40 minutes. And after that, questions from the audience. And the questions, it's best if you put them in as a comment to everybody, which you have in the bar down here. You can just write a comment. Gordon, I would like to start with a question. First of all, perhaps you can say just a few words more about yourself, but then why did Aberdeen decide to go for hydrogen? How did this happen? Gordon. You need to unmute. Yeah. You're still not. You need to unmute, Gordon.
Can you hear me now? Yes,
Perfect.
thank you. So thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you for inviting me to this session tonight. Well, my name's Gordon McIntosh. I was Director of Enterprise Planning and Infrastructure for the City of Aberdeen in Scotland until I retired in 2016. I then was asked to go to Canada to be Deputy Minister of Natural Resources in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Currently, I am Chairman of Aberdeen International Associates Limited, and I am also a Director of the Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group. Finally, I'm a visiting professor of the Robert Gordon University in the city of Aberdeen. So that's a little bit by way of background. My broader background is to be involved in economic development of oil and gas, stretching back to the early 80s in Aberdeen, and was responsible for developing the supply chain around the oil and gas industry in the north of Scotland. You asked the question, why did Aberdeen go for hydrogen in 2011? Well, I had followed all sorts of renewable energy, having established the Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group in 2002. And prior to that, in 1997, we decided in Aberdeen to focus on energy as opposed to oil and gas. Now, I would have to say that that decision, based on my advice, was focused on economic development, as well as the realization that the environment was going to play an increasingly important role. I did launch it at an event in London, and I did get heavily criticized by the oil and gas industry at the time. However, we moved on, and the Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group established a couple of early things, one of which was a proposal for a wind farm off Aberdeen and a testing centre to test turbines and their foundations with European funding, and with a partner who initially was AMEC, now part of Wood, but their interest was taken over by the Swedish utility Vattenfall. Some of you may know about that development because it's the one that the departing President of the United States was very much against in relation to his golf course in Aberdeen. So AREG also established the biggest renewable energy conference in the UK called All Energy around that early period of 2004, 2005. When it got to 2011, we were well developed in relation to looking at renewable energy. And my attention was brought to a small development in a place called Methil in Scotland, Methil in Fife. There was a small wind turbine attached to an electrolyzer, which had been developed by a company called Pure Energy, which was headed by a Tunisian gentleman whose name was also Daniel Akil. And when he showed me that they were using the wind turbine during the day to produce electricity for an office, but at night they had an electrolyzer that was taking the wind, which was continuing to blow, as it does in Scotland most of the time, and using that to drive an electrolyzer and then store hydrogen, which can then be converted back in that case. And I thought, we have a growing offshore wind industry in Aberdeen. Surely we can do something in relation to hydrogen. So I set about with my team to look at opportunities in Europe for funding, because the Fuel Cell Association in Brussels and a gentleman called Bert de Kavanagh, who headed the department there, was very, very supportive in new hydrogen projects. So why hydrogen? Because Aberdeen is an energy city. It was looking at how to diversify, because the oil and gas industry in my time had gone up and down 5 times, boom and slump. And increasingly we could see that some of our companies could moderate that boom and slump by working in the renewable energy industry. We also had about 200 members of the Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group at that time. And some of the bigger oil companies, such as BP and Shell, were being very supportive. But hydrogen was an opportunity. It was an opportunity for us to decarbonize, but it was also an opportunity to diversify our supply chain, Daniel.
Very interesting, Gordon. Thank you very much. Now, so really, it wasn't just because it's green, you admitted, it was economic development and trying to build the future. So not only because you wanted to save the world. Now, you, in order to do this, I think you told me that you had to receive a lot of subsidies from Europe and subsidies from other places in order to build the buses, to build the stations. How do you think will this be able to work when the subsidies are not there anymore? Do you think that is possible? What is your view on that? Or
well, it's a really important point, Daniel, because we involved two commercial bus companies in the bus project. We'll focus on the bus project, and from their perspective, they didn't want to spend any more on the purchase or lease of their buses. The bus companies were called First, the First Group, a large international group based in Aberdeen, and also Stagecoach. So their conditions were that the bus could cost no more than a diesel bus would cost, because that's what they were used to. And the efficiency, especially the road time, the amount of time it was actually working as a bus, had to be similar. And that was part of the pilot in many ways. So that was important. And also the fuel cost, of course. The fuel cost had to be reasonable as well. And so we needed subsidy to make sure that they weren't having to spend more on fuel than they would on diesel. Now, since we started in 2012-13, the price of a bus then was £950,000. It was Van Hool in Belgium who were our partners. It was a Ballard fuel cell from Canada, from Vancouver. And in terms of the electrolyzer, it was Hydrogenics. They were our three main partners of many, many partners in this project. But the price of a bus is now down to about, I understand, about £550,000. So you can see quite a dramatic reduction, but still not as low as a diesel bus. I think here, I think we will continue to need subsidy. And if you read any of McKinsey or any of the big accountancy firms and their projections for the future, they're all predicting that the cost of green hydrogen can come down by the end of the decade. But in the meantime, we need still to bridge the gap, and governments need to bridge the gap. And it's very interesting just now because in Scotland, there's a huge interest in hydrogen for everything. But people are not being realistic. It's been slightly overhyped. For example, the distilling industry, where the whiskey distilling industry are looking at ways to produce steam. And I have been saying, it's silly if you've got available electricity from wind to convert that back to hydrogen, then use hydrogen when you can use renewable electricity from offshore wind directly. So people are a bit confused at the moment, but I think the key area for me is transport. That's the area that's going to be effective first. And the last thing I'll say on this part just now is that I've been watching China, as I know you do, very, very carefully. And they're very, very smart people, we know that. And they're focusing, they're not saying, let's get rid of brown, grey, whatever you want to call it, hydrogen. They're encouraging the growth of their industry and their manufacturing sector by saying, yes, use brown and grey, and we'll convert to blue or green once the price comes down. So they're driving it from the perspective of low fuel cost to try and drive their manufacturing industry, which is really important to them, as we all know. And they're being successful. At the same time, as we know, they are looking at green and they are investing in that side as well, but they are certainly not holding back on the brown, and are looking to develop more brown hydrogen resources to drive the hydrogen economy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we all know that hydrogen isn't necessarily good for the environment if it's brown hydrogen made from steam methane reformation out of natural gas. How did you organize the supply chain? What was the source of your hydrogen? Was it brown, blue, or green?
Yep, well, it was in the first period, in the training period, before we managed to get the electrolyzer up and running, there was a 5-month period where we had to train a team in terms of fueling, and we used a tanker from BOC during that period, and we needed, for training purposes, to have the buses, some of the buses, able to work on hydrogen. So for a period of 5 months, we purchased it in on tankers, on trailers from BOC, but then we used green hydrogen, and I'll be careful here, because what we did initially, we had a proposal for our own onshore wind to drive the electrolyzer, but ironically, the regulator wouldn't allow it to happen because we were working with Scottish and Southern Energy, one of the big energy companies. And we had a European project to fund that element of it as well, but it wasn't allowed. So we had to then go into an agreement with Scottish and Southern Energy to provide green energy. Now, the good thing is, by that time, and now in the north of Scotland, we have lots of onshore wind, we have hydro, and for the north of Scotland, we've had green energy now for 7-8 years, more than we need. So that was positive. But the agreement we had with Scottish and Southern was to supply green energy to drive the electrolyzers. My initial plan was to use the offshore wind farm that Vattenfall were to build, but it had been delayed, and it was also subject to a pre-contract in terms of sale of the electricity with another company. So we had lots of compromises and twists and turns before we could go forward with the green hydrogen proposal. Yeah. And of course, this was a European funded project, so everything was being carefully watched in relation to the I's and the T's and exactly what we were doing in terms of what we had promised to do.
Yeah. Well, Gordon, thank you very much. So we will now. I think we could talk for much longer. And actually, I wanted everybody to pick up their glass of wine. And Gordon has special permission to take a glass of whiskey, which he has, to say cheers. Thank you very much. Before we go over to Mathieu for the very interesting Paris story as well, and then we will have questions. I see their first questions arrived for everybody. Cheers. Thank you very much, Gordon.
Slàinte.
So, Mathieu, I would be happy that you quickly introduce yourself and start telling us why you decided to start a company called STEP and why this company decided to go hydrogen and not battery electric. Mathieu?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so good evening, everybody. So I'm Mathieu Gardies. I was a student at Central Paris, and I left Central Paris in '94, last century. Then I started my career in an auditing firm, PwC. Then in consulting, in financial market activities. Then I went to the in financing activities in a bank named Xis Capital Markets, which became then Natixis, and I left this in 29 to launch this project and launch this company named STEP. So STEP is the acronym for Société du Taxi Électrique Parisien. So the company was founded more than 10 years ago. And the objective of this company was to find solution in order for some activities that will remain in cities with cars like taxis to switch to zero emissions as soon as possible. So it was an approach which was a pedestrian approach, not a technical approach, or not a car maker approach. It was really from the point of view of the pedestrian. I live in Paris. I have a family in Paris. I raise my children in Paris, and I am a pedestrian or bike user in Paris, and I would really love that there will be more mobility services in Paris, so that I don't have to use my car, and that the car that have to remain in the street to be zero emission. So no emission, no exhausting emission, and no noise. So that's why we are. The idea of STEP was to find solution in order to help activities that will remain in the cities, like taxi, to switch to zero emission as soon as possible, and so to switch to the electric vehicles. To answer your question, first we started with battery electric vehicles because in those years there was no real solutions for hydrogen cars, only prototypes that were very expensive. So we started to try to launch a project with battery electric vehicles, with the first generation of battery electric vehicles, and we failed for various reasons. We didn't succeed to launch the fleet between 2009 and 2014. And in 2014, there was something new in the hydrogen world because some Asian car makers brought some some series on the market, some model series on the market, namely Toyota and Hyundai. And so we decided to switch to hydrogen. And we succeeded in launching the project in a few months in partnership with Air Liquide. And we officially launched the HYPE initiative. So HYPE is the name of the brand of the name of the fleet. And so we launched HYPE in December 2015 during the COP21. And it was the same day the launch of the 5 first hydrogen taxi, and the opening of the first hydrogen refueling station in Paris, Place de l'Allemand. Daniel mentioned it. We now have, let's say, more than 100 taxis, and we are targeting a strong and steady growth in the coming months, and we will reach 600 taxis in the coming months. So significant growth. This is today the biggest fleet of hydrogen private car in the world, but it was already the case 5 years ago with the 5 cars. So just to say that we are really at the very, very beginning of the industry. So there's no, I mean, we started very, very soon. I don't know if it was a good idea. It's a lot of risk anyway, but you really have to understand that we are at the very beginning of the story. So now there's a big hype, a big buzz, positive buzz on hydrogen, which is very positive for us. But it's really something that started with some 5 to 7 years late compared to the battery world. And to answer to your question, Daniel, is the reason why we switched to hydrogen is because hydrogen is really it's bringing the solution that we were looking for, meaning a zero emission vehicle. And it's also bringing solutions to issues that we have with the type of activities like taxis, which is not a question only of autonomy of the vehicle, but it's a question of operational constraints, and notably constraints regarding recharging, refueling. We have all seen that there are a lot of progress in terms of cost and capacity on the battery side, which is good. There are also a lot of progress in terms of fast charging and increasing the power of charging, but charging an battery electric vehicle still remain an issue, and that's a very, very big difference from a user point of view with hydrogen. Hydrogen car is really something that uses exactly like a diesel car, because you don't think I will have to stop my activity or waste some time by recharging. No, at some stage we just refuel the car, and it will not take you longer than what it takes you with a diesel car. So it's much, you don't have this psychological fear that you have with battery electric vehicle, which is at some stage, even if the autonomy is big, at some stage you will have to recharge, and it will take time, and you will be at risk at this moment. And that's the very, very positive point with hydrogen, and especially if you use that in an activity which has a lot of constraints like taxi, or like taxi meaning also in Paris VTC activities, so PHV activities like Uber.
Yeah, very interesting, Mathieu. It's and very interesting. You're staying ahead of the curve. If you were the largest fleet with 5 cars, and now you're the largest fleet in the world with 600 cars, or will be.
Not yet 600. 100, yeah.
100 right now, but 600
yeah.
soon, I think, right?
Yeah.
So
correct.
This is a great story of making something happen and making it economically viable. What were the biggest hurdles as an entrepreneur to getting where you are today? Are you already fully profitable? I think you said you're viable already, right? You don't need subsidies.
No, that's not exactly true. We are pure commercial and project, meaning we are trying to put the hydrogen world, which was more in a world of subsidies, R&D and subsidies, which was a situation that Gordon just described. And we are trying to accelerate things and bring things in a commercial and business approach. And so we now have pure financial investor that joined the project, not only industrial partners like Air Liquide or Toyota, but also pure financial investor. So people that put money and they are expecting to get some money back with some significant value creation. So we are in this logic, but today we are investing meaning losing money. If we were comparing the situation with using diesel car, of course, it's much more expensive to use fuel cell car and to use hydrogen compared to diesel. That's what Gordon just mentioned. Today, it's still more expensive, but we are trying to accelerate things so that the convergence accelerates compared with diesel. And we are, for the moment, investing and creating positions where we will then generate value, which is the basis of the expectation of the investment of our investors. So not exactly profitable today, but from the very beginning, we were in the objective of being profitable, and with this only target of being profitable. And for the moment, we still benefit from subsidies, but we do not wait for subsidies. We do what we have to do, and we put ourselves in a situation to get the subsidies when they are there. And the fact is that we are heavily benefiting from subsidies, both from the European stage, like Gordon mentioned, the FCAGU, also now from local subsidies from the region or from the Mairie de Paris, and also from the government subsidies now with ADEME. So I think the idea is for the moment, we need to have some subsidies, but we don't wait for them. We're happy to get the subsidies, but our model is not relying on the fact that we will have some subsidies. Well, so we take them, they are there, but we don't wait for them, and we don't change the strategy for them. The strategy is really to say, we do have a identified market that is relevant for hydrogen, and this market justifies some investment for industrial partners, or also for financial partners. So hydrogen is really seen for us as a way to go and capture a market, which is a market of putting in relation taxis and customers, so the Uber market, namely. And we believe that hydrogen is a very good solution to capture this significant portion of this market, because it's a way of bringing the solution that the customer is expecting, meaning a zero emission solution. So we are building this zero emission solution, and we are convinced that this solution with this taxi activity at a worldwide level is relevant, is commercially valuable, and will generate value. And it's also an accelerator for the whole industry.
Yeah, I really admire this. This is very, very courageous. And I don't know who in this room has already taken a hype taxi, but it's a good experience. And it's so wonderful to see that somebody's out there who's going through all the hoops and things to be able to put a hydrogen taxi on the road. Bravo, Mathieu. So how do you see the future of your company and the future of hydrogen? What is your vision? And that's the last question before we have another sip of wine and then go over to questions from the audience.
We are extremely pragmatic. I mean, the future, that to be honest, I don't know. I think there's a huge potential, but we have to be very pragmatic. Now we focus only in situation where hydrogen is relevant because battery electric world doesn't do the job. So where battery doesn't do the job, then hydrogen can be relevant, and that's where we focus for the moment. Perhaps in 10 years, this balance between the two worlds will change. My view is at the end of the day, the best technical solution is an hybrid with a battery, with a plug-in hybrid battery, and with a fuel cell. So best of two worlds. So there is a lot of potential for hydrogen, but we should not oppose battery world and hydrogen world. Those are two solutions, and those technical solutions are bringing some solutions to existing problems, and it can be different now and in 10 years. So anyway, a lot of future for hydrogen, for mobility, but also for other application. But we have to be pragmatic. So I don't say this has to be there, this has to be like that, and this has to be in 10 years. Honestly, we don't know, but there is some potential, and we want to make this potential arrive.
Can you share your vision for the Paris Olympics, or is that still secret?
Yeah, no, I can share that. And typically our what we have in our plan. So I was mentioning the fact that we will target achieve 600 taxis in our own fleet in, let's say, in the coming month. And this is the end of the first phase for us. And the second phase is to be able to propose this solution to all the taxis and all the VTC in Paris or PHV in Paris and in other cities in the world. And typically in Paris, we are targeting 20% of the market by the Olympic Games in 2024. The market is 50,000 cars. You have 20,000 taxis and you have 30,000 Uber-like activities. So 50,000 global market, we are targeting 20% of that. So 10,000 cars use that taxi or VTC with hydrogen for the Olympic Games in 2024. That's the objective for Paris. And of course, we have the objective to replicate that in all the cities that face the same situation as Paris. So a lot of pollution issue, and looking for solution to make those captive fleets and necessary fleets switch to zero emission as soon as possible.
Very, very interesting. And I had a shock after not having cars on the road with COVID, which is one of the nice things that COVID does. And then coming back out when people started using their cars again, suddenly you can smell all the exhausts. For me, it was quite a shock, because when you're used to it, it's nothing. Mathieu, I think we should raise the glass one more time. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. And we will go over to questions from the audience. There's quite a few in the chat, and I will just go from top to bottom, I guess. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.
So the first question is, have you ever considered a mixed model combining green hydrogen and blue hydrogen? So green from solar and wind and blue from natural gas and plus CCS. And which Gordon, or I don't know who wants to answer.
I can certainly say in the northeast of Scotland just now, we've got two major upgrades, if you like. There's two bigger hydrogen projects, one looking at green hydrogen and one looking at blue hydrogen. The natural gas lines in the North Sea come ashore at St. Fergus, and there is a project at the moment which will produce its first blue hydrogen by 2024. And the second one called the Aberdeen Hydrogen Hub, which is with Vattenfall, and they're looking at about 45 megawatts by 2028, but starting in 2023 with a smaller amount. And mixing the two together or using the two has been discussed. particularly in relation to heating. We're not speaking about heating at the moment. Really, it's been transport we've been focusing on. But if there are opportunities to use to mix green with blue, and remembering blue is much cheaper, then we will be looking at doing that. And some of the users that are looking at it at present, I know, for example, I mentioned the distillers earlier, not for the production side, but they have signed, I know, an NDA with the blue hydrogen producers to look at sourcing blue hydrogen for the first part of their period of conversion. It's interesting, just if I can focus on that for a second, because the distilling industry, it'd be a bit like some other drinks industries, they're getting questions now about their product and how it's made, because they're thinking about their customers 10, 15 years time, because that is when the whiskey that they're making today is going into the market. So they're moving, there's an example of fast movers. They want to move quickly now. And wherever they can, and where it's sensible, they will use hydrogen.
Very interesting. There's a follow-up question on this. On the levies are quite important on fuel in the UK. Is the price of hydrogen at parity with diesel in Aberdeen? So about the price comparison in Aberdeen. And so it's Gordon again.
No, as I say, it is subsidised at the moment. So it's not at a parity without subsidy, no.
And then perhaps we take a question for Mathieu in between, and then I'll shift it back and forth. So it says, hello, Mathieu. At the start of your H2 fleet, how was the fueling situation and how did it evolve?
Yeah, that's something important. In order to be able to go fast without relying on the industry or the government, we have internalized in the project all the aspects of the ecosystem, meaning that we now deploy our own network of stations. So when we started 5 years ago, it was in partnership with Air Liquide, and Air Liquide deployed the first station, Place de l'Alma. Then Air Liquide deployed some stations at the airport in Paris, Roissy, Charles and Orly. Now we have created a company, and in this company you have Air Liquide, but you also have STEP, Toyota, and financial partners. This company is building the network of stations. Therefore, we don't need to wait for stations to arrive. We produce our own, we deploy our own network of stations at the same at the same time with the growth of the fleet. So we have the same time increase the fleet and same time increase the capacity of the network of stations. So this company is named ISETCO, and so the next station that we will build 4 stations next year in Paris. Typically, they will be directly deployed by ISETCO, by this company, and this company ISETCO will also acquire the 2 stations at Orly and Roissy, which were initially deployed by Air Liquide. So part of the project, we have the network of stations, and it's key because you have to have the hand on the way of refueling the fleet and the way of improving the capacity of the network to refuel the fleet. And it's also a way of not being too dependent of the cost of H2, of hydrogen, because of course the cost at the pump for the moment it's too expensive. But if you build your own network of stations, somehow you have an asset that you can create some value with this asset. Of course, it's a very interesting barrier to entry for the future, and we are very happy to have our network in the station at the best location in the area.
Yeah, very, very important point. So the next question is to Gordon again. Thank you for your insights, Gordon. 2 questions. 1, building on the Aberdeen experience, what is the case for an LNG-based economy to shift towards hydrogen? And 2, do you think the development of green hydrogen tech could foster technologies towards realization of commercially viable Sabatier process?
Yep. Someone will have to remind me what the Sabatier process is. I think I know what it is, but someone will have to remind me. The first question really is a continuation of LNG and gas. And I mean, it's natural gas before it's liquefied natural gas that we have coming ashore, and also and also in a gaseous form as well at St. Fergus. And so, yes, LNG converted to blue hydrogen with fixing the carbon in some of the offshore fields. In the case of the Aberdeen project, it's Goldeneye, and there are many, many now ex-gas fields that are empty and have the proper geological structure to store carbon dioxide. So yes, there's a whole new industry developing around gas. But then I've been doing some work in Mozambique, as you know, Daniel, and Mozambique, they've just discovered in the last 5-6 years the third biggest gas deposits in the world. And they are looking, obviously, to export that LNG internationally. And for those countries that don't have a ready source of energy, especially in the Far East, places like Japan, there is work ongoing to look at how LNG can be converted to blue hydrogen. And it is seen as an important step forward, and also allowing third world countries, because I think that's one of the big unanswered questions at the moment. Much of the fossil fuels are still in third world and developing countries like Guyana, Mozambique, Nigeria. We can only expect them to want to continue to develop their resources. So especially where there's gas and you can fix the carbon and produce blue hydrogen, there is a very strong basis for a blue hydrogen economy, at least as an interim fuel until green becomes more competitive.
So does anybody want to explain Sabatier, what he meant with it? I looked it up on the internet, but it's I don't quite understand the context. So otherwise, why don't we take the next question for Mathieu? We understand that cars with batteries have less availability than hydrogen cars. He wants you to be more precise to better explain.
Yeah, so it's the case in some situations, in some cities. So it's not the case for every taxi everywhere in the world. But typically, if you take the situation in Paris, it's the same in London, the same in Madrid, the same in Italy, etc. Most of the drivers are independent drivers. So they are supporting all the risk of the activity. And if you come to them and say, okay, you have to switch to zero emission because it's better for the planet, etc., that's what your customer wants. But you will have you have an additional constraint, which is at some stage you may need to stop your activity because you may need to stop the car for 20 minutes for a fast charging. Then the guy will say, oh no, I cannot do that because I may miss an interesting and profitable ride, and I don't want to be in a position to miss an interesting and profitable ride. So there's a psychological hurdle with independent drivers. The guys they are working every day. They are looking for the big ride. Something that does not really happen statistically, but that's the reason why they stand up in the morning and they work all day. And if you say, okay, in some case you may lose that, they will not accept it, and it will be difficult to organize a quick switch. And that's why hydrogen is very helpful, because with hydrogen it's very simple to explain to a taxi driver, independent taxi driver. You say, well, it's just exactly what you do today. There's nothing new. So you have the same type of autonomy, 500, 600, but once the autonomy is done, it takes you 3 minutes to refuel the car. So exactly the same time that you need with your diesel car, and it's better. It's better because there's no vibration, there's no noise, so it's better for you to drive. When you refuel the car, it's better because it's clean and you don't have to hold the nozzle. And for your customer, it's better. So, okay, it's just better on every aspect, and you don't have any additional constraint. And therefore, there is no reason where you should limit or slow your switch to this solution. And in addition to that, the reason why the driver would switch to zero emission is not because he wants to protect the planet or whatever. It's because the customer will ask him to switch to zero emission. If you take a customer and a taxi customer in Paris, it's not you and me. A taxi customer in Paris, most of the customers are corporate companies. most of the taxes that are paid, most of the revenues are coming from corporate companies. And if I go and see a corporate company, big corporate company, and I say, okay, so today you are working with Uber, you're working with G7, I can provide you with the same service with no extra cost, and we will not pollute. And I will be able to provide you with some reports on the number of kilometers that you've been that you've made without polluting for the same price. They cannot refuse. So ultimately, the customer, the final customer, will accelerate the change, and the driver will follow the customer. But for the driver to follow the customer, we need to make sure that the switch will be painless for the driver, and that's where hydrogen is bringing a solution. But it's not the same situation typically in Northern Europe. We will not go for the moment in Northern Europe because we think that typically in Northern Europe or even in Germany, probably a good German car or Tesla Model S can do the job perfectly for a taxi. So hydrogen is not bringing something new in this country with the taxi activity in Berlin or in Norway, etc. But if you take the situation in Paris, in London, in Madrid, in Milan, in New York, there, we know that with the specificity of the activity, with the specificity of the operator of this activity, battery electric is not the ultimate solution, and hydrogen is bringing a solution.
That is a very, very good concept, Mathieu. I mean, it's pretty well known in any recycling and other industries. Unless you have pull from the final customer, or let's say the pull from the final customer is the key for your success. I think what the concept you just talked about, that the corporations will put this in their corporate social responsibility report, is absolutely brilliant. I'm very, very impressed with all the work that Mathieu and Gordon have done. Gordon, the next question comes for you about the electrolyzer. The asking whether the capacity was coming from occasional supply from the local grid or only when green electricity was available from wind turbines, which means was it running 100% of the time or only when there was wind, which may be 100% of the time in Scotland, as you told us.
Yeah, well, yes, we're very lucky when it comes to producing energy. There is lots of wind in Scotland, and our percentage of time where the wind is blowing is higher than any other part of Europe, fortunately or unfortunately. So yeah, but we did have a backup in terms of we did have always a trailer-based hydrogen just in case we needed it, in case we did have a wind backup for any reason. And I think it's important as well, it's kind of related to this question and also to Matthew's last question, that the buses actually, people have argued with me and said, why do you not use battery buses? And the bus companies want the buses on the road during the day when the passengers are being collected. They want them there, their usability rate as high as possible. They don't want them down charging batteries. So the hydrogen fueling system allowed the buses to be on the road all day, and all the buses were fueled at night. So they're refueled at night between 12 and 6 in the morning, and they were all ready to go. And the hydrogen, even though it was only going in areas up to about 15 miles, 20 miles, they kept on doing that all day, and they didn't have to come off. So in terms of usability, that was very, very important. So they're always fueled at night, and that helped as well in terms of building up the hydrogen in the tanks as well. But we did have situations either from a mechanical perspective on a few occasions or a lack of energy where we did have to go to the backup and use the tankers, the trailer-based hydrogen.
Very interesting. Next question is for Mathieu. France emits 34% less CO2, according to EEC source, per inhabitant. So what is the rationale for fighting CO2 in this country?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We are not fighting CO2. The main leverage that we use is not carbon, it's public health, it's local emission, it's pollution. And the reason why it's, that's why I was mentioning initially that it was a pedestrian approach, because when you're a pedestrian in Paris, you can feel the pollution. And this is interesting because CO2, I mean, we of course want to limit the emission of CO2, etc., and we will participate to that. But it's very difficult to make things move on that because it's global. So if you want to make something move on CO2, someone will say, well, not necessarily do something because Mr. Trump has said he will not join the les accords de Paris, and so they are polluting a lot in terms of CO2, etc. Or the Chinese will do, etc. The advantage of looking at health issue, it's that it's local, and so you can have you can put the responsibility on local politicians. Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, is not responsible for the level, I mean, for the climate change all over the world, but she is responsible for the quality of the air of the Paris citizen, of the Région Île-de-France citizen. So there you have a direct link to the responsibility of the politicians. So if I go and see Mrs. Hidalgo or Mrs. Pécresse and say, okay, I have a solution in order to transform quickly the fleet of 50,000 heavy polluters like taxi or VTC or buses, etc., that will switch to zero emission instantaneously or very shortly, and this solution works functionally, it works economically, then it's your responsibility to make things move, because if you don't that, you will be legally responsible for putting at risk the health of your citizen. So you have a very more powerful leverage on politicians because it's local responsibility. So our main, typically if you go on our website, we do not communicate on the CO2 that we avoided. We communicate on the NOx that we avoided, local pollutants. Because on the NOx, you are it's a local approach, it's a public health approach, and it's much more easier to make things move and move quickly with that. But at the end of the day, we are also working hard in order to improve the CO2 aspect and typically using as much as possible green hydrogen progressively. So we started with blue hydrogen. So hydrogen that was brought to Alma station by Air Liquide was blue hydrogen, so with carbon capture. Now the station that we are deploying, typically the next station which will be Porte de Saint-Cloud, there will be an electrolyzer on site, and the electrolyzer will be, of course, plugged to the network, but using, let's say, renewable electricity provided by an energetician. So we are switching progressively to green hydrogen, and so improving also the carbon balance of our activity. But the first target is not carbon. The first target is the local pollution and public health issue, and so typically NOx.
Very, very interesting. And as I said, I fully agree with that. If we can clean up our cities from within, plus reduce the CO2, but cleaning up the air we breathe would be wonderful for every single one of us living in a city. Gordon and Mathieu, did you do life cycle assessment of your project with indicators like CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hours, metal per kilowatt hours, land use per in square meters per kilowatt hour, and are these available? Who wants to start?
Perhaps I'll come in first because we did do a certain element of that work as part of the project. The availability, I would have to check. I don't have that at hand. I'd have to check back with the city. It didn't cover all of those, but it did cover some of the impacts. Can I just add something to what Mathieu said a moment ago? Take the opportunity to do this, because what Mathieu is speaking about is part of that bigger debate between incentives and disincentives, between grants and taxes, between carrots and sticks. And governments need to, you know, in places like central Paris and central London, things like congestion charges, where polluters have to pay, and that then makes the viability of the hydrogen vehicles far easier. Then that is something that needs to be considered, in my view, by various governments, whether they're local or national governments. And I think we see increasingly cities looking at the potential of charging the polluters in city centres because of health. And that's the right road, in my view, to go down. There does need to be a shift away from just pure incentives to a combination of carbon taxes and incentives if we're going to get where the world needs to get to. So sorry for hijacking that bit and coming back in on that, but I felt that was important to say.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gordon. Mathieu, do you want to add about the life cycle assessment?
To be honest, that's something that we do because some financial investors needs to have it. But again, since we are not targeting the CO2 approach, etc., and we are not also targeting the energy efficiency, we all know that hydrogen is not a good solution from the perspective of energy efficiency. It's stupid. But in the real world that we live in, it's even if it's stupid from an energy efficiency approach, it's relevant because it is bringing some solutions to existing problems. So we should not focus only on what the energy efficiency aspect, etc., but is it bringing a real solution to an existing problem?
Well, we are coming to the end of the hour, and I found one question which works pretty well for the last one. It's again for both Gordon and Mathieu, and it is, thank you for these very interesting presentations. I would like to know what is the benefits from being pioneers in these fields. How do you measure the rewards related to such risky endeavor or investment? Who wants to start first?
Yeah, I may. That's a very good question. I mean, I was mentioning the fact that we have two phases in our project. First phase, which brings us to 600 taxis, it's a preparation phase. This preparation phase, in this phase, everything is too expensive, too complicated. So it's a phase that it's stupid. From a financial point of view, it's stupid to do that. It's stupid to be a pioneer in a competitive activity with a higher cost, with a more operational constraints. So if you just do that to be a pioneer, it's stupid. But this phase one, in fact, is preparing the phase two. The phase two is proposing this solution to the market that we have identified, that is scalable, that is profitable, etc. So in fact, this phase one is an investment for preparing ourselves for phase two. So this stupid phase one, in fact, makes sense because it's a logical and necessary investment to get access to the phase two. So to answer to the question, there's no value in being the pioneer. That's from a financial point of view or an entrepreneur point of view, somehow stupid. But if doing that, being the pioneer, you are creating conditions where you will then make money, to be clear, or create value, then it makes sense. So that's why we do not have a lot of competitors, in fact, because it doesn't make sense just to have a taxi using hydrogen cars so far. If you don't do that in order to do something else, to getting access to this market, it doesn't make sense.
Yep. Daniel, if I can come in, I think I know the question now. For me, if you think of me as a city manager or somebody responsible for the economic development of a region, that's where I'm coming from. So the things that I'm really looking at are the development of the supply chain, the reputation of the city, and also inward investment from others. So really what I'm thinking about the future is a place that people want to live, that's healthy, and where people can get work. So for me, any city looking forward, that is the payback for anyone investing in hydrogen. 25 years ago, I would have probably argued against it. in terms of just pure environment. When you sit back and look at it, it's a bit of what we call a no-brainer. If you want to be a successful city in the future, you really need to invest in renewable energy and hydrogen, especially in relation to transport.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both Mathieu and Gordon. That was, I think we've seen it by the number of questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all the questions, but our hour is over, and I think it's important also to keep to the time. Would like to lift the glass and cheers. Thank you very, very much, and hope we can do this again with similar or further topics.
Slanjava, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much,
very much.
for leading
Thank you.
this conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel.